Hey, I was just thinking on what up, it's Rutherford. I'm going to record this evolution video and see if we can actually learn some stuff here. So this is designated for my students here. So where's my share screen thing? That's that button right there. Okay, all right, cool. Okay, so I'm going to start us here. I'm not going to do viruses on this one. We're going to start with evolution. Okay. So, wonderful. Evolution. Okay. We have the four components of natural selection are survival of the fittest. We have, yeah, maybe I could just type it in here. Okay. I'll type some answers. Survival is one of them. And then we also have genetic variety. Okay. Which comes from sexual reproduction, as well as crossing over in meiosis 2. And then general kind of like whenever you combine a different sperm and an egg and crossing over, independent assortment. Okay, so when all the chromosomes are lining up to separate, they can be in different arrangements, right? So like you can get all of your shoes and lay all your shoes in the middle of your room, and then you can just pull half of them to the left, half of them to the right, and you might have, how many left shoes are going to end up over there, and how many left shoes are going to end up over there, and how many right shoes are going to end up over there, and right will end up over there, because as long as you got half of your shoes over here and half of your shoes over there, that's how anaphase works. That's how meiosis is going to work, and it always switches, right? You just like throw all the shoes in there, and then it's like you go over and you find your Crocs, and you throw one Croc over there and one Croc over there. Now, we don't know whether the left Croc is going to go in the left or the right. It's just you just split them, right? And the same thing with your Converse and then your high heels and your toe shoes. You're just always splitting them, and so every single time that you make a sperm or an egg, independent assortment, I should say, in meiosis. Great. Okay. So yeah, we got tons. Oh my gosh, there's even more genetic variety. Genetic variety. There's even more genetic variety that is going to come from mistakes from DNA polymerase 3, which is 1, 2, 3, during S phase DNA replication before meiosis. Okay, so we're just going to get so much freaking genetic variety here, and that is going to be what gives us adaptations, right? Because genetic variety, maybe we could say AKA mutations, and then some of those mutations are going to be beneficial. So mutations can be beneficial, neutral, or negative, right? Harmful. And the beneficial ones are called adaptations, okay? And that's all just random, okay? The key thing with genetic variety here is every single one of these things is random, right? And great. So because there is genetic variety, that's entirely random, and some things, when you change the DNA, when you have a mutation, change the DNA, change the protein, some of those are going to be adaptive, depending on the environment, okay? So we need to have environmental pressure, okay? So I would say if you were to put this in order, genetic variety is going to go first. Like first, we just got to have genetic variety to exist with, right? And then you're going to have your environmental pressure, because the environment is going to pressure you. And when the environment pressures you, then you find out which genetic variety is the most beneficial, and that's called an adaptation. And then you have survival of the fittest. Now, this is not living, this is making healthy babies. I can say caps lock, okay? The ability to make healthy babies, what that means is you're passing on genes, okay? And so the other way you can say it is survival of the fittest genes, okay? People think that that means you're the strongest and fastest and biggest. Not necessarily, right? Okay? If you think of a tree, right? Survival of the fittest tree or the fittest bacteria, It's not the bacteria that's the fittest. It's not the tree that's the fittest. It's not you, the individual, that's the fittest. It is the gene for your trait. Okay. Genes lead to traits, not the individual. Okay. Not individual. Okay. And that's a big thing with evolution that we need to recognize, is that it's really just not about the individual. This is about evolution, the passing on, the natural selection of genes, right? And evolution occurs with populations, okay? Which would be like groups of individuals in same species. That's what a population is, okay? All right, so there are some random ones, and those are going to be your genetic drift, as well as what is it? Gene flow. Okay, gene flow. Okay, now gene flow is going to be migration, like immigration or emigration, both in or out of a population. Sometimes things just move, right? Now that could be kind of random if it's like wind just, you know, moves a seed of a tree, or wind just moves a bird off course and they start mating with something else. But as long as they're in a different gene pool, I mean, the key vocab word that we're going to work with here is gene pool. And gene pool would be like all the genes in a population, but they have to be, this population has to be isolated, like kind of, or like contained in some sense. That's the gene pool, the pool that holds all the genes, right? So if I have a gene pool of tortoises on an island, and there's a mutation that makes them big, then the Galapagos tortoises are going to be extra big in that gene pool. But it doesn't mean that any other tortoises are going to have the genes for being super big. That's just what's going on in the Galapagos. So that's an isolated pool. Now, if that happened in a tortoise that lived on Africa, right, it could theoretically mate with a variety of other tortoises that are in Africa, depending on any sort of like reproductive barriers. And that, we'll talk about that in a second. But reproductive barriers would be like, well, if there's an ocean and you can't cross the ocean, then that's a reproductive barrier. If there is like a rainforest and the tortoises like to live in the hot savanna in the desert, then you have a barrier there. And so that's how you would define separate gene pools. Okay. And then, all right. So genetic drift and gene flow, those are the two that are random. Okay. And then the other three are going to be your natural, sexual, and artificial selection. Okay. So the artificial is done by humans, and humans choose this as like breeding, farming, whatever. Sexual is when the females choose. And then your natural selection, of course, is when nature chooses. Okay. And so this natural selection, let's just make sure that this is the one we're talking about up here. Okay. Natural selection, that's what comes in right here. Natural selection. Okay. Now, genetic drift is the one that I didn't talk about. This is just random death. Okay. It says random right there, but death of random individuals, that's what I like to say for DRI here. If we can, genetic drift is death of random individuals. And this could be like a natural disaster. Okay. This could be lightning strike. This could be, I don't know, slipping and falling, but it has to be totally random. So you have to think about like, is it like, did this tree die because it was not good at holding water, or did this bear die because they weren't good at finding water? You know, so like, in order for it to be genetic drift, it's usually like a freaking avalanche. Like there's no way a bear can kind of like, I mean, a bear should be able to hear the avalanche and then be able to run out of the way. And so it's pretty tough to prove genetic drift unless it's like a freaking lightning bolt. Okay. Or like a volcanic eruption and you got a bunch of trees or plants or whatever, or bacteria that are living in that general area, and like, boom, out of the gene pool. So genetic drift can be, it's a death of random individuals. And you're like, wait a minute, a volcano, that's not going to kill individuals. That's going to kill like entire populations or like huge chunks. So if genetic drift is big, then I guess I should put it here. big drift is a typically by a natural disaster. That oftentimes is called a bottleneck, okay? Because the neck of the bottle is smaller than the actual bottle. And if I have here's my tahine, right? Here's my sunscreen, okay? So the neck of the bottle is smaller than the bottle. So although there's lots of sunscreen and lots of toothpaste, inside of there, when you actually squeeze it through this tiny little neck of the bottle, only a few things get through. So that's death of random individuals. Maybe a lot of them is going to be called a bottleneck event is typically what they talk about. So you think like a giant kind of natural disaster kind of thing. Okay, great. And then we get into chapter 22, natural selection first proposed and supported. This is Charles Darwin, 1859, in his book, Origin of the Species. Okay. So yeah, he worked on that for like 20 years to try and like really bolster it and write that bad boy. Yeah, deal. Okay. So that's where he's going on with natural selection right there. Okay. So next. Okay. This is just more practice. Natural selection. Yeah, great. Okay. How old is the Earth? This is a good one to remember. About 4.6 billion years old. The universe is about 14.6 approximately billion years old. Life started about 2 billion years ago. And that is just the prokaryotes. Okay. And then maybe like roughly like 1 billion years ago, we have the first like eukaryotes. That's typically like your protists, like your super basic, that's where like one bacteria swallows another bacteria. That's going to be your endosymbiotic theory of eukaryote evolution. It would be like one bacteria swallows another. Okay. And that's what we see with mitochondria and chloroplasts, is that those are kind of like fully functioning little factories inside of plants and inside of animals. And you only see that in your eukaryotes. And so the idea is that endo means in, symbiotic, which means living together. And so one bacteria ate another and said, hey, instead of killing you and stealing all your stuff, why don't you just work for me? And that's how we get mitochondria, chloroplasts, and that's where we get our eukaryotes there. Okay. But most of the eukaryotes are really like 500 million years ago. Okay. That's when it really starts to blow up. I think the Cambrian explosion is maybe like 350 or something. All right. And eukaryotes, right there it is. Okay. Survival of the fittest. Okay. Survival of the fittest, again, as we said in the last one, there's where you've got your genes. Okay, cool. So here's a picture of what we talked about before, that we have non-random and random, and their genes can be neutral, beneficial, or harmful. And we have, sometimes there's neutral changes, like eye color would be an example of neutral change. It's hard to find something that's truly neutral, but eye color is really one of them. Maybe blood type, I would say, is another human example, but you can think about it for plants and animals, maybe bacteria too. Most of the time it's either beneficial or harmful. And I should say that when you are randomly changing the genes, mutations, random, then you are likely going to have something that is mostly harmful. Okay. Most are harmful. That's just like the nature of, if you go randomly mess up your mom's cookbook, or go randomly ransack your your sister brother's backpack, like it's not going to be a good thing. It's rare that you going in there and messing stuff up is going to be like, oh wow, now I'm so more organized and I know exactly what to do and change a recipe in a good way. Okay, so this is an example here of probably natural selection or something, right? Oh, transplant. Okay, so remember transplanting, when we experimentally transplant guppies, we're moving them from one area to another where they wouldn't naturally go down the waterfall, right? Like they'd stay in the different lakes. If we move them, what's that called? That's called gene flow. And they move into a different gene pool, and then they start mating over there. And if they mate, they introduce the new genes, right? Yeah, so the predator, the killfish, which is a perfect name for a killfish, preys on the juvenile guppies, and they don't have any color genes, right? Because they don't have any color. They want to have some sort of, they've adapted in their environment to have some camouflage, like be kind of see-through, right? The adult males have brighter colors than those of the pike cichlid pools, right? Okay. So then if you take those and you put them in the pools with the killfish, but no guppies before, then the predator in a different place here preys mainly on the adult guppies, and the adult males are more drab in color, those in the killfish pool, because as the adults, they get color over here because their predator is killifish, okay, which is only eating the guppies. But over here, the pike cichlid is going to be, so the basic thing that we're seeing here is that different environments have different predators. And if one predator is eating the babies, then the babies are going to be kind of like not very colorful. And if another environment is eating the adults, then the adults are not going to be very colorful. That's what it says. So if you move them to different spots, then like, boom, all of a sudden the predators are going to be like, yoink, eat them all up. But separate environments have separate things. And this is an example of natural selection, basic natural selection, and another reproductive barrier that they're in different gene pools. Like those gene pools don't mix unless an experimenter, like a literal scientist, comes and transplants the guppies. Okay, this isn't natural gene flow. They're not flying fish that are flying to a new lake. Okay. The 5 criteria for Hardy-Weinberg. I'm just going to show you. It's coming up soon. Yeah, here it is. 5 conditions for Hardy-Weinberg. Now, Hardy-Weinberg is hard, and you're going to whine about it, but it's a math thing, and it's a way that we kind of evaluate populations, and it's the null hypothesis that like nothing weird is happening and no evolution is happening. So we have the Hardy-Weinberg as kind of like a control. Whenever we're evaluating a gene pool, we can look at the genes and say, all right, let's assume through Hardy-Weinberg, these 2 scientists, that nothing weird is happening. Okay, a null hypothesis, a control, like let's say that nothing is happening, like no evolution is happening. Then we compare that null hypothesis, which is obviously fake and theoretical, we compare that to the actual observed population and the different percentages of genes. And then we can kind of see, all right, how much are they different from a unevolving group, okay? But in order for this to be true, you just got 5 conditions for Hardy-Weinberg. So there's something to memorize. If all the mating is random, if there are absolutely no mutations and the populations are completely separate, there's no gene flow, they got a really big population size, and there's no predators, no natural selection, nothing favoring anything. So in this utopian Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium, if a population is in Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium, that essentially means that like they're trying to say, as it says at the bottom, it can only be met in an artificial environment such as laboratory, where it's just like everybody gets to live, there's no sexual selection, that's that random mating. So it's like all the females are fine with all the males, and there are no mistakes in DNA replication, and this population is just all by itself. There's no gene flow in or out of the gene pool. The gene pool is perfectly isolated, like in a lab, artificially. They've got a nice large population, so, and then no natural selection, just straight up, like nothing is doing that. Yeah, we have to just do some projects with that, but yeah, we'll have to kind of like look at that Hardy-Weinberg situation, just kind of have that as a comparison. Okay, all right, so I think we will get some direct, disrupt, and stabilizing things here. Maybe I can try and draw these, but we will get to those other ones. Let me define a couple of words. Fitness as survival of the fittest, that's what you should be thinking of. Survival of the fittest, as we said before, has nothing to do with strength or size. It is literally ability to make healthy babies. okay? AKA like pass on genes, okay? Reproduce. That is what we mean when we talk about fitness, and I guess specifically biological fitness, okay? And take a little bold out of here. Yeah, I want to define that one. Dimorphism means that there are two phenotypes, okay? And polymorphism means that there would be more than two phenotypes, okay? So if, like with height, with human beings, it's polymorphism, right? With pea plants, right, we got a dimorphism. There's tall and they're short for that particular instance. But morph means shape, and di and poly. Okay. Now the modes of selection here. That one we really just have to get a picture. So, and I don't know if a picture is actually going to come up of these. So I think I'm going to just pull one up here. Okay. You have directional, stabilizing, selection graphs. And these are just so much easier to visualize when you have an image. Okay. Maybe I want this one. This looks, it's not as clear, but yeah, this types of natural selection here. This one is pretty clear, but we have, copy that image and bring it back to this one. And we have, yeah, up here. Your directional selection is going to be moving in a particular direction. So that means maybe there's an advantage to being tall. And so all of the individuals are going to start becoming more and more tall. That's what you see over here with the moths, is that moths were all gray, right? And then they moved in a different direction of being all black. Okay, so evolution is about change, right? Change in the genes, okay, of a population. So it's not that the gray moth literally like changes color, okay? It is that the gray moths die out and the black moths make more babies. Now, this only works if there's a mutation in the gray moth that gives you a black gene, like a black phenotype. If you don't have a mutation there, like, I mean, there's nothing saying there's a purple moth or there's going to be a purple human or a human that can fly or whatever. Mutations don't have to happen. I mean, that's such a key thing with evolution. Mutations absolutely don't have to happen. So this tepard moth did not have to turn black, but if there's a mutation and it's favorable in its environment, that's adaptation, then there's an environmental pressure that favors the black over the gray, then we will see the color of the population moving in that direction. Okay. Let me just triple check that everybody can see this stuff. Okay. So your natural selection, there it is, great. Now in the middle, we have stabilizing selection. This, as they said, is a cool example of peacock tails. Too big, and gosh, they're just going to die like crazy. Too small, and no female will mate with them. So of course, this is a little bit natural selection, but it's a little bit sexual selection in here because the females are the reason that they have the peacock tail in the first place. But obviously, if it gets too big, natural selection is going to take over and be like, yo, you're like dead weight. You're an easy target for any predator. And you can't move around and even find food yourself, too much. Too little, and sexual selection will say, yeah, I'm not going to mate with you. You don't have the right genes. Just right in the middle there. That's that Goldilocks zone for stabilizing selection. So it's stabilizing, meaning the peacock tail will kind of like stay in a particular range. Okay. Then we have diversifying selection, or what I see as disruptive selection. Okay. So we have the stabilizing, we have directional, and then our disruptive selection at the very end, or yeah, diversifying selection. This is basically favoring both options. So if both extremes are really good, an example here they have with the rock pocket mice, I think I'm remembering this one as like, perhaps they live in an environment that has volcanic eruptions pretty often. And so some of the rocks are tan and some of the rocks are covered in ash. And so you can either be either color. You can be tan to blend in, stay away from predators as a little mouse, and blend in with the rocks that aren't covered by volcanic ash. Or you can be black and blend in with the black rocks that are covered by ash, or the areas that are covered by ash, to like, I don't know if it's rocks, but whatever environment. That would favor both extremes, diversifying, disruptive. And this is typically what could lead to speciation, because then if they are different colors and you can't have any in between, then everything that's a hybrid that's in between is likely going to die because it doesn't have the traits that it doesn't have the right traits. It doesn't have any camouflage. That's like maladaptive. But they keep mating with each other and forming that middle one. So likely what happens is if you see this disruptive selection, likely those are going to be evolving into separate populations. And then if you give it enough time, like tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years, they could evolve in into separate species. Okay. Typically this will happen if all of a sudden there is a river through that divides animals that can't, or plants that cannot cross the river. That can happen, or perhaps an earthquake, or an island breaking off. Then you would kind of see this disruptive selection of like, oh, well, you're either one or the other, but not in between. But not always the case. You can just have kind of like a disruptive selection where, you can think with humans, it's like we're either runners or swimmers. And if you're good at both, then you're not very good. If our environment was some cutthroat, Chinese Olympics training team, it's like, you got to be able to do one or the other really, really good and not both. Okay, great. Let's go back to this vocab. Oh, and then we have our speciation. So let's break down these words and not get afraid of them. Habitat is a pre-zygotic barrier. Pre-zygotic means before making the zygote. Zygote is egg and sperm fertilized together, okay? Now, if they live in different habitats, then they're not even around each other to mate. So they're going to become separate species, okay? If you separate the Galapagos tortoises, they break off from all the tortoises that were attached to, I don't know, was that Africa or something? That's Madagascar. No, it's probably South America. If you have an island kind of separating, then they live in different habitats. Nope. When humans started moving out of the rainforest in Africa and living more in the prairies and grasslands and savannas, we were no longer in the same environment as our tree-dwelling ancestors. If we're in a different habitat, then we're not going to mate and even make a zygote. And if we're not in the same place and not mating together, then our gene pool starts to separate, and then we start to become separate species over hundreds of millions of years. Okay, this isn't like, this doesn't happen in 10 years. This doesn't happen in a generation, right? Unless you're a bacteria, then it can happen really fast. But okay, but that would be before you even form a zygote. Okay, that's a barrier. And that barrier basically creates separate species. Speciation is the creation of separate species. Okay, now behavioral would be different behavior. So this is a good example with birds. Okay, so maybe birds mating. You can have bird dance versus singing. Okay, so if some birds, maybe all the birds were mating together. Let's pick like I don't know, a parrot. Okay, so let's say some parrots started singing, or cockatoo. There's a singer. Some cockatoos ancestral cockatoos started singing, and the ladies that like the singing are like, oh, great. But then other ladies are like, I don't really care. I like the guys who dance. Okay. So then those cockatoos are going to kind of become different because some ladies are like, I like the singers, some ladies like the dancers. And if nobody likes the in-between, singer, dancer, songwriter, if nobody likes the in-between, then they're going to become separate species just because they got different behavior. Because if I don't like the behavior that you're doing, I'm not going to mate with you. Okay. So that's going to, again, be a pre-zygotic barrier because we're not even going to make a zygote. Okay. Now temporal is based on time. Okay. And so what this could be is that if there are certain animals, like let's say a nocturnal animal, okay, maybe some nocturnal animals prefer to mate in the morning and others prefer to mate at night. Okay. Let's think of one species of wombat. Okay. And let's say all the wombats, they mate at night. Okay. But some wombats start preferring like sunset, and some wombats prefer more like early morning for mating. If there is a difference there, then we could see speciation, the creation of separate species. Okay. If they're mating at separate times, because then you can separate and have separate gene pools and boom. Okay. All right. Now the mechanical is the gross example of the duck. Okay. If the genitalia do not fit, then you are going to become separate species. So you got to imagine a long time ago, the ancestors to ducks and whatever, like there's ancestors to ducks started to get mutations. Some male ducks had penises that were curled and curly-cued clockwise with, a barbed hook. And some ducks have penises that are curled clockwise and not barbed. Okay. The female reproductive tracts also evolved in that way. And so now there's situations where different duck species, they can't mate because literally the genitalia do not fit. Like it just doesn't work. And if the genitalia don't fit, maybe they're living in the same habitat. Maybe they have the same behavior, mating behavior, and they want to mate at the same time. But if the stuff doesn't fit, then you are going to become separate species. Okay. There's nothing saying that any of this has to happen. We just like, if we're looking at a population, we're like, oh, this changed, this changed, this changed, or this changed. They're living in different habitat. Oh, they might start becoming new species. They are having different mating behavior. They might start becoming separate species, right? And then finally, we have the gametic, where all of these things are in place. They live in the same habitat. They like the song and dance or whatever. They are mating at the same time, and the genitalia fit, but the gametes don't work. You got to have, for humans, you got to have 23 in the sperm, 23 in the egg, kaboom, right? If you put a chimpanzee, they have 23 chromosomes, I think. If you put a chimpanzee chromosome or sperm with a human egg, you just it's not gonna form a zygote. So that would be a pre-zygotic barrier if it just can't actually happen. Okay. Maybe all the other things are in place and they're actually mating, but the egg says, nope, I'm not with that sperm. That's where you start to get like a speciation event, right? So maybe we can think about this in terms of like horses and zebras. They've been separated for a long time, right? Now they're in different habitats, so they're not mating together. But maybe if we put them together, if they like each other and they're mating at the same time and the genitalia fit, then maybe they could make a baby. Okay. If they can't make a baby because the zygote's like, nah, this ain't going to happen, that's going to be a pre-zygotic barrier. Now, that is going to have like a separate, now the allopatric speciation, this is happening in like geographic isolation. So the geographic isolation there is allopatric, and that means that they're physically separated. You have like, again, like I said, physically separated. That could be by like an island breaking off, or like if glaciers are melting and all of a sudden there's a river that forms, like the Grand Canyon, whatever, if there's a physical separation, then we're going to start to see speciation. Now, typically that's going to be your habitat kind of a thing. All these other ones, your habitat one is kind of your allopatric, I guess. That might be the only one that is allopatric. And the rest of them, okay, all except habitat. Because in sympatric speciation, they are sympatric speciation, they are living in the same space. Okay. So like physically, geographically living and mating in the same space. So you would look at these populations, and this population is just like a bunch of things mating together, right? So like our allopatric situation is like, we got horses separated from zebras by like the Atlantic Ocean, okay? That's separated a long time ago. That's allopatric speciation, okay? But we can have horses, like horses and donkeys. They live in the same area, but maybe they like, I don't know exactly what their difference is, but they live in the same space, but they start to become separate species. Either that's where you start to go to the pre-zygotic barriers, behavioral, temporal, mechanical, or gametic there, okay? All right. Now, then we get to the post-zygotic barriers. Post means end. Post-zygotic barriers mean like, all right, listen, everything lined up. We're living in the same place. We're sympatric. We are, we like the behavior. We're mating at the same time. Mechanically, it fits, and the sperm accepts the egg. Go team. But then the baby you make is either gonna die. Okay, maybe it dies in infancy. That would be hybrid viability. If the baby's born, but it dies quickly. Okay, that would be hybrid viability, where it's not viable. Okay, so we could call this like embryo or infant death. That would be hybrid viability. That's going to be what makes that not viable. Okay, then hybrid fertility is what we have with mules. A mule can be born and work very hard, but it is not, sorry, I'm about to sneeze. The mule cannot make babies. It's infertile, okay? Whereas the horse and the donkey that they mate to make a mule, you can actually make a mule. But the mule cannot make mule babies. The mule cannot mate with a horse. The mule cannot mate with a donkey. The mule itself, because donkeys and horses have become so different, the mule itself cannot make any babies, so it's infertile. So what that means is the horse and the donkey are still going to remain separate species. They're almost completely separate species, right? This also with mules, we have things like the liger, the lion and the tiger, okay? Ligers, I don't think can have babies, you know, but they're still relative. We have other things like lions and pumas make lumas, and all these big cats, for some reason, you can still mate a lot of them. I just think that they're not fertile. Or you have breakdown, where this is like later generations are not fit or fertile. So like maybe like, okay, we can mate a lion and a tiger, and then the liger can mate with other ligers or lions and tigers, but eventually down the line, it doesn't work. Like the next generation dies, or the generation after the generation dies. And this we can kind of see is like, all right, listen, they're just starting to become separate species. Okay. And the more we go down through this stuff, and then, you know, we get more and more isolated, and then all of a sudden it's just like they're entirely different organisms, and they can't even mate, and that creates the separate species. That's what we have for speciation there. Okay, now intra versus intersexual selection. This is a good example of the intra is male competition. Okay. When males are fighting, this is like anything with antlers or horns, pretty much. I mean, horns kind of, I don't know, like typically that's just a display of masculinity, and that's the intrasexual selection. Okay. And whereas the intersexual selection is, inter means between, so that's between, that's female choice. Okay. So sometimes, and the antlers, horns, also giraffes, okay, are also doing your male competition. That is intrasexual selection, because intra means within, and we're talking like within the males. Like the males just fight it out within themselves, by themselves. That's intersexual selection. Now, obviously, the female's there and she's watching and whatever, but she's not actively participating. Whereas intersexual selection is like female choice with dancing birds and, anything that's trying to impress. Okay. Genes in the gene pool: beneficial, neutral, negative, and then pseudo. I'll have to double check on exactly what a pseudo looks like. Pseudo means fake. So perhaps there's like a fake gene or something like that. I'd have to look and see exactly what that is. And then we talked about Hardy-Weinberg and punctuated equilibrium. Punctuated equilibrium is the concept that sometimes evolution occurs rapidly, all at once. One example of this would be the Cambrian explosion, where you just like, or right after I think it's the KT boundary, it's called, where the dinosaurs went extinct. We have 5 mass extinctions, okay? 5 mass extinctions. And then right after that, we have basically like massive speciation. You have it's called adaptive radiation, is something that can occur where you have a death of a bunch of dinosaurs. All of a sudden there's a whole bunch of space and niches and food, but also habitat, and there's less predators. And all of a sudden the age of mammals comes about. Okay. That would cause an adaptive radiation. All of a sudden there's just mammals spread out throughout the world, just adapting to all these different places that they couldn't really be at before because the dinosaurs were dominating. That would be a punctuated equilibrium, where it's like, okay, for a while, the dinosaurs, for millions of years, right? The dinosaurs were just like dominating the planet, and the mammals were all like small and underground, mostly, right? And things were just more or less steady. Then a giant asteroid hits, okay? And boom, it just shakes everything up, okay? It shakes up the equilibrium. And so then it's punctuated. There's like a punctuation, kind of like ends a sentence, right? So punctuated, we're thinking about, periods and exclamation marks. The Cambrian explosion is just a whole bunch of animals, I'm pretty sure, going out on land, right? I'm pretty sure it's like 360 million years ago. Cambrian explosion, just all of a sudden, just a ton of new animals evolving all over the place, right? And then the dinosaurs go extinct 65 million years ago. Okay, million years ago is MYA. I haven't been writing that before, but MYA is another way you can say that. And then dinosaurs go extinct. Oh my gosh, a mass extinction. And right after that, tons of speciation. We put a punctuation. We say, boom, things are changing. Huge amounts of evolution and change. And you can see this in the fossil record. You could just be like, all right, things are pretty similar. And like, oh my God, okay, so much is changing. All these new fossils, all these new species, okay? As they spread out, they're in different habitats, and then you have all those speciation things that, yeah, okay. All right, gosh, I'm really liking that. I don't know how many more I should go. We got some clades here. We talked about a lot of clades in class, and what happens is these like different animals are always evolving. That's a big thing. Random population mutations, always evolution is always occurring, okay? But certain things, like I said, could happen that would cause massive evolution. Okay, so here, let's maybe stick on this slide might show us the Cambrian explosion 530 million years ago. Okay, let me bring this a little bit bigger for us. Okay, so 4,500 million years ago, there's a microfossil there. Or how long ago? 30. Yeah. Then eukaryotes over there, they have 2 mil. And then we've got it's a long time before we actually start to see something. And there's just a lot of volcanoes and crazy stuff going on there. Cambrian explosion 530 million years ago. Okay, then we got mass extinction events, punctuate equilibrium. Right after mass extinction, lots of stuff, mass extinction and land. Mass extinction, land plants, right? All this stuff is in the water before that. So the Cambrian explosion was in the water. Then we keep going and we got more mass extinctions. And then the big mass extinction right there at 65 and boom, like tons of speciation, adaptive radiation, radiating, adapting to new environments, the age of mammals over there, okay? We can look at this one here. Again, they're always refining these years and stuff. So you just need to have like a basic concept of like, okay, stuff really started happening in the last 500 million years, okay? Whereas like the first eukaryotes here, they have 1 billion year ago. And then before that, it's just kind of like the start of Earth, 5 billion years ago. The prokaryotes there was like, for the longest time, it was just bacteria, okay? And then we get into eukaryotes there. They're saying about 1.2 billion years ago, an explosion of life there again. Okay. And let's see if there's anything else. We've got the evolution of different plants coming online here and how they came around based on different traits that kind of came about and were beneficial. But remember, in order to have flowers, you got to have bees, and most of the plants were in the water first, and then they can start coming up on land. But they have to have strong cell walls and like vascular tissue so that they can actually bring water from the ground up into their leaves and stuff. So lots of different evolutionary steps for plants there to actually come onto land. And then with seeds, you got to have stuff that's going to eat the seeds. And so, but you're seeing the timeline here basically is like, yeah, most of this stuff is, it's algae for forever. But then 400,000 years ago, right? And once there's plants, then there can be herbivores. So then you see more evolution of animals. Whereas before, it's like animals are just eating animals in the sea, or they're eating algae. Okay, so we think about the evolution of things based on like, well, the food source kind of has to be there first. And the first thing that does evolve is plants have to evolve first so that they can put a bunch of oxygen in the atmosphere. But it could be photosynthetic bacteria. So if we look at way back, we have oxygen and CO2 being kind of converted. Like we have to have plenty of oxygen in the air before we even start to think about having eukaryotes with mitochondria that are going to convert that oxygen into CO2. So yeah, we got to think about the necessary conditions for things to evolve. But anyway, that's a pretty good one. I'm going to stop that there. And thanks for joining.